super great treat today. I'm Mark Blattner, CEO of the Jewish Federation, and we're continuing our weekly Wednesday seminars, all the way from coming from Israel with people who are working there, living there, and living the daily lives of Israelis. Today we have Danielle Mor joining us. Danielle has worked at the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is one of our longstanding funding partners here at the Jewish Federation. She's worked there for more than 20 years and currently serves as the Vice President for Israel and Global Philanthropy. Previously, her roles have included working with the ambassador to the United States, Salai Meridor, former chairman of the Jewish Agency, where she served as a shlicha to New York City for the Israel Education Fund, and also several positions in strategy and development. Through her work, Danielle has been deeply involved in the Jewish Agency's Aliyah and absorption initiatives for immigrants from Ethiopia, Ukraine, and France, and programs for Holocaust survivors and funds and those who are utilizing funds for the victims of terror, which Danielle can talk about. Danielle was born in West Hartford, Connecticut. She made Aliyah from the United States with her family when she was a child. She was a commander in the Israeli Air Force and later completed her degrees in international relations, sociology, and organizational counseling, all with distinction at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Recently, Danielle completed a second master's program in American Jewish Studies as part of the Haifa University Ruderman program. So Danielle, welcome. We're delighted to have you all the way here in Portland, Oregon. And please share with us how things are and what you'd like and where the Jewish Agency is today.
Thank you so much, Mark. I don't believe that I've ever visited Portland, so this is probably the closest that I've come to doing so, and thank you so much for hosting me. And I believe that people that are tuning in and people that will be listening to the recording are people that care about Israel, that want to know more, that perhaps have visited even more than once. And what I can share with you, speaking to you at this time, when it's so hard to believe, but we are almost 4 months since the day of the massacre of October 7th. And still the feeling is that this is an Israel that I'm speaking from that is irrevocably changed from any Israel that you, Mark, or that any of the people viewing this or listening to this have ever visited or heard from in the past. Because it's a country that is still grappling with the urgent of the here and now, while it is also trying at its very best to somehow look at what could be the day after. But we are still not even in the day after, even though it's been 4 months, because we are still grappling with this horrendous reality that we faced of what happened on October 7th, the number of soldiers and civilians that have been killed since that day, the number of soldiers that are still being wounded each and every day. Just this past week was one of the harshest days where I think Israelis just felt that they can't even breathe, with 24 soldiers, sons, daughters, husbands, siblings that were killed in one day of fighting in Gaza. And while it's clear that we are now in an Israel that's fighting with all the soldiers that are still fighting in Gaza and on the northern front, an Israel that's mourning. We're mourning those that we lost on October 7th, and we're mourning those that we sadly, tragically are losing each and every day. An Israel that is completely displaced, with hundreds of thousands of its citizens displaced from their homes, living as refugees in their own countries. Many of them don't even have a home to go back to, whether it's communities in the north that have been bombarded beyond recognition, or communities in the south that have been burnt and pillaged and completely laid waste to. So an Israel that's fighting, that's mourning, that's displaced, and also an Israel that finds it so hard to breathe when we're still facing this reality of 136 hostages still in Gaza. Among them, children, a baby, women, elderly, fathers that their sons, children, wives were released maybe 50 or more days ago, but they are still held hostage in Gaza. Young women that the idea that they have been hostage for such a long time raises the most horrendous and fearful thoughts about what could happen to a young woman in such a period of time. And in what status might she be coming back home to if, and we all hope and we all pray that they will be coming home to. So it's an Israel that is fighting, mourning, displaced, without breath, and trying to deal with this unbearable reality. And I'm speaking to you from the Jewish Agency. I don't know how much people that are listening know, in fact, what the Jewish Agency is, but we are actually the organization that established the state of Israel. David Ben-Gurion was our chairman. Golda Meir was our Secretary of State. And we established the state of Israel. We have been trusted by the government of Israel and by the global Jewish people to act as the agent of the Jewish people in areas from Aliyah, rebuilding and building the state of Israel and connecting the global Jewish people. People in Portland probably know our shlichim, our emissaries, know our partnership programs and many other platforms that help to make Israel and shape the Israel and global Jewry relationship to what it is today. And just if we're speaking even about these communities of the Western Negev, we have been there, Mark. We have been there already before 1948. The community that so many people today know its name for all the sad reasons, Be'eri, was established by the Jewish Agency along with 10 other communities in the Western Negev in an amazing pioneering effort back in one cold night of October 1946 to establish overnight 11 communities in the Western Negev to set the borders of what will become the future state of Israel. Other communities in the Western Negev were also established by the Jewish Agency. Here you just have an example of Kibbutz Alumim, which is one of the kibbutzim that the Hamas terrorists entered and murdered and pillaged and burned on that day of October 7th. So we have been there, we are there, and we will be there to help and rebuild these shattered lives. Because the fact that we are fighting and mourning and displaced and without breath, it all goes down to the basic truth that the fundamental promise that Israel was founded upon, the reason for the state of Israel to be established, was to give the promise of never again. Never again will a Jewish person be at risk and be defenseless. That's what the state of Israel was created to do. That's what the Jewish Agency was committed to and did for decades when we rescued Jews from Iran, from Russia, from Ukraine, from Ethiopia, from every place around the world where they were at risk. But here, on one day, Israeli citizens, civilians in their homes were defenseless, and the promise was broken. And so if there is any hope for any kind of rebuilding, it has to be in restoring that promise. So when we look at what precisely has the Jewish Agency been and is doing at this time, we can divide our work to, first of all, the emergency direct relief that we are giving citizens, the work that we are doing to support vulnerable populations that are within our care, the outreach that we are already engaged in for the physical and the communal rebuilding, and our commitment to ensuring safety and security for Jewish communities in vulnerable places around the world. And I'm sure that you've heard from many different people these past few weeks, and it is clear, and I want to say this very clearly, that any civilian that was hurt, that was wounded, that lost a loved one, any family of the hostages, any person that their home was damaged, is a person that we have and will be helping. And we are helping them through a direct outreach effort led by our Fund for Victims of Terror. And just to put this in perspective, Mark, the Fund for Victims of Terror was established over 20 years ago. And in 21 years, it assisted some 9,000 individuals. 9,000 people in 21 years, because that was the total number of people that needed help, that were in that awful category of victims of terror that nobody ever wants to be called. And now in just one day of October 7th, we realize that whereas in 21 years we helped 9,000, now due to one day, we will need to help 30,000. And I'm speaking about the people that are directly hurt and their immediate relatives, their widows, their orphans, the people that are directly within the circle of this horrendous impact. And so what we have been doing is that from already that first day of October 7th, we have been there on the ground, in the hospitals, in the rehabilitation centers, in the burnt communities, in the evacuation hotels, reaching out proactively and giving this direct assistance with a commitment that we are not just springing out here to give you this assistance now. We will be by your side for the next 3 years to come to support you and to bridge gaps between what you need and what the government of Israel is able to provide. In this scope, we have also assisted all the different regional councils in the north and the south with direct grants. We are supporting the business owners. If you can just try to imagine, what does it mean to be a soldier fighting for your country and knowing that your business back home is now falling apart, that your wife or that your family are trying to hold everything together for you and for the country, and to know that while this fear of everything falling apart is gripping you, you are also ensured that we are supporting you with a direct grant, with collateral-free, interest-free loans to be given to support some 2,000 businesses. When we look at vulnerable populations, I'm speaking at the most vulnerable populations that the Jewish Agency is caring for. I'm speaking about some 7,000 poor elderly and Holocaust survivors that are living in our assisted living facilities. The reason they are living in these assisted living facilities is because they are the poorest elderly and loneliest elderly in Israel. And these people, many of them Holocaust survivors, have had to deal with the fear, whether those that live in Ofakim, that the terrorists entered and murdered 52 residents of that city, among them one of our elderly living in our home in Ofakim, or whether they are the ones that are fearing evacuation from the north. And most of them say, Mark, I don't want to go anywhere. I ran away once, whether it was as a child or an infant during the time of the Holocaust. I ran to come to Israel for safety. I am not going anywhere. So for them, we are providing hot meals, food baskets, security measures, and helping them feel that they are truly not alone. We're also doing this for the new immigrants, many of them from Ethiopia, living in our Aliyah centers. And one of these centers is right near Gaza. It's just about 2.5 miles, 3 miles, not even, from Gaza. There was an attempt twice on October 7th by terrorists to enter that Aliyah center, and somehow miraculously they did not. And the 638 New Orleans from Ethiopia were all saved and were all evacuated the very next day, and they are still in evacuation. And when we're trying to look ahead, when we're trying to look beyond the emergency, beyond the heartbreak of this time, we are also considering how can we be there to support these communities as they seek to be rebuilt. We are looking at this also from the individual level. For example, sending some 1,500 teens from these border communities, from these grieving families, to send them to summer camps in North America and in Europe. We see this as critical for their own sense of resilience and for their own ability to look ahead in life. And also we realize that each and every one of those campers and those counselors that they will meet in those summer camps will be transformed and will become a witness. When we are concerned with how and what is the level of understanding of young Jewish adults or teenagers across North America or in Europe, by meeting these Israeli teens so harshly and tragically affected by the war, they will become witnesses. And of course, we are considering how can we create partnerships between some 30 of these affected communities, 2 communities all across North America and around the world, to ensure them that for the next 3 years to come, they will be supported in this critical venue of partnership. And lastly, we are there to also rebuild physically. Our subsidiary company, Amigul, has been entrusted by the government of Israel, by the Ministry of Defense, to be on the ground to conduct the mapping of all the buildings that require renovation, of all the buildings that are sadly beyond renovation, and to be able to rebuild these communities, not only just to renovate, but also to rebuild. And there's so much that goes into this, Mark, because families don't want to go back into a home where their loved one was murdered or somebody was abducted from. Young families might not want to move back at all to these communities, fearing safety for their children. So there is so much concern that goes into these questions, so much sensitivity. And in that sense, our ability to, on the one hand, support the spirituality, the resilience of these communities, and also the building of them is so important. Lastly, our work that takes place all around the world through our emissaries, through our shlichim, our staff that's on the ground, and the way that they have been able to lead, to participate, to be critical elements in rallies, protests, demonstrations, and various educational efforts are there to say that the entire global Jewish people stands together at this time and will continue to do so. And just to bring this a little bit to make it more personal for you, I have had the honor these past few months to be there in the hospitals and in the evacuation hotels and in the headquarters of the hostages, and to be there to represent not just the Jewish Agency, but to represent, in fact, all of us, to represent the global Jewish people that is reaching out at this time of need to give some degree of comfort and some degree of promise that even if very sadly I'm saying this, the state of Israel failed its citizens on October 7th, the Jewish people is there to be committed to everyone that is hurting now and for years to come. So this young man that I met by his hospital bed in late October, it's a complete story of miracle, how Oshri even is alive, how he survived. He went out fishing at the Zikim beach on the morning of October 7th. It was the first time in his life that he went out fishing without his father, who chose to remain in his warm bed on that morning. Oshri barely arrived at the beach, barely even got a chance to unpack his fishing gear when he saw a sight that he just could not believe and could not understand. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, the sky became red and full of light because of the blazing rockets flying overhead. And on the other hand, he started seeing terrorists emerging from the water, coming out as scuba divers from the water onto the Zikim beach. Oshri did not serve in the IDF. He has a chronic disease. He completely was defenseless. And the only thing he could think of was somehow run to the nearest bomb shelter and hide. What he did not realize is that more and more terrorists were coming, and they came to that mobile shelter. And at this point, we all know what happened in those mobile shelters and how grenades were thrown in, and later how armed with machine guns terrorists came in. Oshri saw those people around him by his side killed on the spot, and he suffered a direct hit of a bullet that went into his eye socket, down his esophagus, and into his intestine. And somehow, despite these critical wounds, he somehow made a decision that he is not dying today. He managed to get himself out of that shelter and into his car, start the car and drive for a few hundred meters until he was stopped by two policemen. The policemen that saw that he was completely not capable of driving, they put him in their car and they drove like bats out of hell, coming into the Barzilai hospital, where they left him as an anonymous patient. By this point, he was completely unconscious. He was hospitalized as an anonymous patient, and they themselves drove back into the gunfire and into the rocket fire to try and save civilians that day. Oshri was hospitalized as anonymous for nearly 3 days. His family, that was beyond driven crazy by concern, were finally able to identify him. He was unconscious and sedated for over a week. He underwent some 9 operations, received 7 blood transfusions. Truly, it's a miracle that he's alive. And when I came to visit him the first time, he didn't even want me to take his picture. He hardly was able to speak. The second time that I came to visit him, he told me that he has one request. And what was his request? He said, "Those police officers saved me. And I am so afraid that maybe they are no more, that maybe they died because they dropped me at the hotel and then at the hospital, and then they drove back into the fire, into the fighting. And I want to be able to try and find them. And he only knew where they met him, and he was only able to say that one of them was of the Ethiopian community. And I assured him that our command center will do everything it can to contact the police and to find those policemen. And Mark, I want to tell you that it took us a few days, but we found those policemen. And I called them on the phone, and I first called Avraham, and I told him, hi, my name is Danielle, I'm from the Jewish Agency, and do you recall that a few weeks ago you rescued a young man from the Zikim Beach area? And he immediately said to me, is he alive? And I said, yes, he's alive. And there was silence on the line. And I said, are you there, Avraham? And he said, and he started crying. He started crying and he said, I have seen that young man in my dreams every night since that day. And I was sure that he must be dead. And I couldn't even bring myself to try and locate him because I was sure that I would find out that he's dead. And I told him, Avraham, he's alive. Not only is he alive, he was worried about you and he wants to meet you. And then the next phone call was to Danielle, and Danielle was the second policeman that saved him. And with Danielle, it was the same thing, Mark. He also told me that he's been seeing this young man in his dreams and is sure that he is dead. And here you can see the time that we were able to bring them together. Avraham and Danielle, the two police officers that saved Oshri that day, that saved many other lives that day, and that, thank God, are here alive to tell the story. And when you look at this picture, you see a tapestry of Israeli society. You see an Ole from Ethiopia. You see a young man from the city of Sderot who belongs to the founding generational families that founded Sderot. You see Danielle, the officer that made Aliyah from Ukraine and was educated in the Jewish Agency Aliyah village of Hadassah Neurim. And you see myself representing in some way the global Jewish people. Danielle, Avraham, and Oshri are now, of course, in touch. The families feel that this is a bond that will go with them forever. And us being able to be there for Oshri, to support their family in the time of need, and to create this reunion is such an important step in them having faith that they can somehow emerge and continue to live from this tragedy. And we have been doing this for every victim of terror that we have been supporting, for the over 8,000 that have already been directly supported by us, whether it's Ronen, the head of the security for Sderot, whether it's Tamar, who lost her boyfriend at the Nova Festival, whether it's Guy, who nearly lost his life at the Nova Festival and was afraid that he wouldn't even be able to walk again, whether it's Adil, who lost his 3 childhood friends at the Nova Festival and is somehow recuperating and says that he does not know what is he doing above ground when 3 of his best childhood friends are below ground. Whether it's Yovel, who was a bride for just 1 month. She was married on September 7th, and she came to the Nova Music Festival that day with her husband. And within 20 minutes of arriving, they arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning. Within about 20 minutes, he was already gone. She was a bride for 1 month, and now she will be a widow for the rest of her life. And for these people, we need to be there now, and we need to be there for the months and for the years to come. And I'm just ending here with a picture that I took when I visited at Kibbutz Be'eri, still in October. And with trembling hands, a soldier that was there, based to clear the bodies and to clear the wreckage, with trembling hands, he shows me this fragment of a burnt Bible. And he told me that when he joined the IDF and growing up in Israel, he thought that those stories about burnt Bibles are stories of the past, stories that his grandfather as a Holocaust survivor shared with him. And yet he was standing there at Be'eri and picking up the shreds, the fragments of a burnt Bible. And what he was focusing on here is in Psalms 29, is this sentence that people that pray it every day. The Lord shall grant strength to his people. The Lord shall bless his people with peace. And if that's something that we can pray for, and that we can act for, and that we can create change for, to be able to pray and act towards the strength, and to be able to bring some degree of peace, and to be able to restore the promise that was broken. Thank you for inviting me to share today. And thank you for everything that you and your community are doing for Israel and for our people from afar.
Danielle, thank you. As I told you before we started, we've been doing these on a weekly basis. And I can only speak for myself, but I will tell you your presentation and the story you just shared about Oshri has been one of the most powerful parts of what we've done on these weekly Wednesday seminars. I was in Israel in December and had a tour of kibbutz Nir Oz and saw the devastation firsthand that was happened there. And to hear what you shared and the story of the bride who lost her husband 1 month later, it's unbelievable that I'm not sure we really understand the psychological impact of what's taken place in Israel. And it's very difficult. So I'd like to encourage anybody, if they have questions, to ask some questions in the Q&A. But Danielle, let me start on a happier note, if I could. First of all, you mentioned you've never been to Portland. You're welcome anytime. So we'd love to invite you to see our beautiful community in the Pacific Northwest. But just some personal reflections. How are you and your family? You know, it's hard, like you work in this business and at the same time you're an Israeli. So just kind of talk about that from a personal level, if you would.
So thank you for the invitation, Mark. You know, there's a certain feeling of survivor's guilt. There's a certain feeling of privilege in a way, of being utterly blessed, because, you know, living in Modi'in and having all my relatives really in situations that they're either too old to be recruited to the IDF, or they're too young to be recruited to the IDF, or they're just serving in sort of not frontline positions. You're really in a position that you're saying to yourself, you know, thank God my children, my loved ones are safe. With that, we're living in this reality of trauma. I can tell you that I've been busy trying to figure out which part of my house I would be able to hide effectively from terrorists in. Where would I tell my daughters to hide if the house was attacked? Do I have sufficient, you know, water if there's a blackout from the north that is a real threat that we're very concerned about? So we're living in this reality, me personally, you know, feeling on the one hand very protected, very blessed, and almost actually feeling somewhat guilty. You know, I'm going to visit these people, these displaced people without a home, without loved ones, and I'm coming back and I'm able to hug my husband and daughters. And that's a feeling that on the one hand, you cherish that joy that you have. On the other hand, you just realize the depths of the pain, and you try to reach out and to do everything you can, but you know that in so many ways they are alone in their pain. And that is a very harsh feeling to have when you're a person that's trying to help.
Yeah. I spoke to a colleague in Beit Shemesh yesterday in Israel, and he shared with me that his 10-year-old daughter sleeps with her two older brothers in their room every night. And the brothers inside of their bedroom have hammers next to their beds in case, God forbid, there was a terrorist. Like, we don't think like that. We don't live a life like that. You know, we, as you said, you know, we just go to bed at night and, you know, you wake up the next morning. The trauma that is continued to be expressed in Israel, and as you said, is irreparably harmed. It's never going to go away for generations. And it's really just this traumatic experience. So I'm sorry, but I hear you. And look, we all just want peace for Israel. And, you know, God willing, that will happen in, you know, sometime in the near future or in the future. But these are certainly difficult days ahead. I wanted to go back to your presentation, which I really, really appreciated. So I should share that The Jewish community here in Portland did an Israel emergency campaign, as did other communities across the country. We far exceeded our goal of $1 million. We raised over $2.2 million, and $1 million of that went to the Jewish Agency. So when people see the statistics that you shared, Danielle, I'm proud that our community played a role in that. So we're grateful for that. But you shared a statistic at the beginning that I just wanted some clarification, but also blew me away. And that was that when the Victims of Terror Fund started 21 years ago, in a 21-year period, you helped 9,000 people. And here we are 3-4 months since October 7th. And on the chart, it showed 8,000 grants, but you said it has impacted 30,000 people because I guess their families, et cetera. Can you just talk a little bit more about what those grants are for, kind of what range they're in and how they're trying to help, et cetera?
Yes, so 30,000 is what we realized that we will be helping in a period of up to 3 years, because the support is given first as an emergency basis to those that are directly hurt. So in the first circle, if you consider the number of people that were murdered that day, over 1,300. If you consider the number of people that were wounded that day, over 5,700. If you consider then therefore also the people that are impacted in the sense that their loved ones were taken hostage, or if a person is murdered, that person might have had parents, a wife, children. So every person that was murdered has around them a circle of people that are now grieving, sitting Shiva and trying to rebuild their shattered lives. So in the immediate circle, there are approximately 8,000 people that we have already assisted with emergency grants. And the emergency grants are given, no questions asked, no forms to be filled. And it's on average approximately $1,000 per person that were given. Okay. In addition to that, there are further grants. There are 2 other steps of grants that are being now given. One of them is a humanitarian grant. There are those among those impacted that we realize that their situation is so complex that they need, on the one hand, also mentoring on how they can access rights and how they can connect with other aid organizations, but they also just simply need more funds. And those are the people that we are reaching now with humanitarian grants. We expect that those will be given to a total of 10,000, and we're right now in the process of granting them. The last stage is looking at long-term rehabilitation. These are people that in the next year, 2, 3 years, they will be in a position in life where they will want to acquire a new profession, or they will need special equipment for their apartment, or they will seek some unique kind of therapy that perhaps the government of Israel does not grant. And these people will be supported with approximately $7,000 worth of services, and it can be given over a period of 3 years at one go, or over this period of time. Beyond all these forms of direct financial assistance and mentorship and helping to understand rights and opportunities, we are also developing programs that will be working specifically with these groups. One of them is already being implemented, and it's for children and teenagers. We are already offering resiliency training in some of the evacuated hotels and some of the places where these survivor communities are located. And also to children that we're bringing together. We did this over Hanukkah, for example. We did yesterday a half day of activities for children. So these are programs that we're already implementing, but we are going to expand them significantly, and it will be for children and youth, for students, for young adults, and we're doing a special track of programming that will be for the survivors of the Nova Music Festival, realizing that they are coming from all across Israel. They are not connected to one another the same way that the community of Nil Oz is connected, or even people living in Sderot that are somehow loosely connected. And so these are groups that we will be supporting through specific programming that we will be either partnering on with different organizations or leading ourselves.
Wow. Wow. So you just shared a lot that the Jewish Agency is doing. And there are multiple other NGOs in Israel doing incredible work as well. Can you talk about, just because we're here and I don't really know, like how do you work collaboratively? How do you make sure everybody's doing their piece of the pie? Can you just talk a little bit about, what the Jewish Agency's role is and all of that?
Yes, definitely. So if you look at what the scope of this disaster, it meant that there was a wide variety of emergency needs that emerged just, within hours. So, just think about the fact that we have that there are tens of thousands of people that in one day, October 7th, not only are they suffering the loss of their loved ones and living through this trauma, but now they are homeless and they have absolutely nothing. They don't have clothes, they don't have a toothbrush, they don't have anything, and they need to be evacuated. So this created a whole movement of volunteers that were there to help in the evacuation, that were there to provide everything from meals to toothbrushes to shoes to sweatshirts to diapers to medication to everything. These are people that woke up in the morning and after hours and hours of agonizing hell were evacuated with nothing. So a whole movement to bring about these, different command centers, different emergency distribution centers, to bring about equipment that came from businesses, from volunteers, from different people doing good in Israel, and then to help and dispatch and deliver it to the different places where the people are located. Now that we're 4 months later, a lot of this work has calmed down, but it's still there because, for example, if you were a person that were evacuated from Nir Oz or from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, you're still trying to retrieve things from your home. You don't have your car because your car was burnt or stolen into Gaza. And so you're trying to retrieve things. So there are still these volunteer organizations that will help and bring things out for you. And maybe you were evacuated to a hotel, but you can't live in a hotel for 4 months without going crazy, a family in one small room, without a kitchen, without a living room, without any privacy. So people are moving. So as people are moving, that creates further need. There are these organizations that will help you in your move. There are organizations, the Jewish Agency is also part of this, that will help you find an apartment that you can live in that will either be very subsidized or will be given as a donation for a certain period of months. So there's a whole myriad of services just around that. And then if you're thinking about the wounded, the people that are in the hospitals, in the first 2 months, it was a multitude of civilians. Now it's mostly soldiers, because for the most part, the civilians that were wounded and that survived their wounds are not in the hospitals anymore now, 4 months later. So a whole lot of volunteering around, again, bringing food, supporting the relatives that are there, night and day with their loved ones, bringing in equipment, bringing in joy, whether it's, medical clowns or whether it's just people coming in to sing at the top of their lungs. So a whole myriad of these different organizations. Of course, the whole area of therapy is a complete, huge need, because as it was even before October 7th, there was an understanding that there isn't a sufficient number of therapists in Israel to deal with just, the basic reality of living as a country that has constant terror and constant stress levels. Now there is an understanding that there clearly are not sufficient therapists. And all these different organizations that are providing therapy, Natal and the Trauma Coalition and, many others, Mashabim, they're receiving support also from the government, also from donations, giving treatments largely without charging to people that are identified as victims of terror. And they are spread all across the country, coming into the evacuation locations, meeting people also in their own offices. So there's a whole myriad of work that is happening together. I will say that the Jewish Agency, through our command center and through our network of connections, we are networked with a lot of the organizations that existed before October 7th and the new organizations that came up, that some of them are very small and niche, and some of them have grown more significantly. We are in the process of either already having relationships with them or building new relationships with them. Everyone is in this for the understanding that we are trying to do good. Nobody is trying to duplicate services or, or get a claim to fame. And it is a very challenging, reality, but this is a good challenge. This is a good challenge to have, where there are so many people that want to do good and you're coordinating between them.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You started your presentation, and I was intrigued. You talked briefly about the history of the Jewish Agency, and in fact, it was the government of pre-state Israel. And but then you quickly showed a slide that showed this letter of these kibbutzim in the Western Negev being created in 1946. Pre-state. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the Jewish Agency's role in that thinking process as best you can?
Yes, of course. So, if you think about the earlier part of the 20th century and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire that was ruling over this part of the world for 400 years, and then the rise of the British Mandate coming into effect already by 1919, 1920, 1922, it was already completely signed and sealed. And at that point, the different Zionist organizations that were working and were trying to work towards an establishment of a national home for the Jewish people, they worked very closely with the British Mandate, with the League of Nations, and they actually created the Jewish Agency for Israel. The Jewish Agency for Israel was established through the efforts of Professor Chaim Weizmann, who realized that the only way in which we could ever have this dream of a Jewish home achieved is if all of the Jewish people work together. And so he did something that was unfathomable back in 1929, and he had a very hard time passing it, but he did. And that was to bring together those that were defined as Zionists, those that saw their future in Israel, and also the many, many Jews around the world that did not identify as Zionists, that felt allegiance and loyalty to the countries in which they were living. They did not feel that they wanted to immigrate to Israel at the time, but he was able to bring them together for this common cause of giving the Jewish people a national home, with the understanding that a national home does not mean that it's your physical home. It means that it's the homeland of your people restored to them. And so the Jewish Agency from 1929 was acting to give the Jewish people a home. Its chairman was David Ben-Gurion, already from 1934. And, so many streets in Israel are named after people that were leaders of the Jewish Agency at the time. The Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv that everyone goes to for the protests. He was director of finance for the Jewish Agency all the way up to the establishment of the State of Israel. So the efforts that were made in those years were to build up the infrastructure of the land. And one of the ways of doing that was to establish new communities. At a certain point, the British Mandate forbade it. It did not allow anymore the establishment of new communities because they were afraid of the repercussions with the Arab population. And so many of these efforts had to be done in a clandestine way, taking advantage of laws at the time that stated that if you have a building with a roof and a fence, it cannot be torn down. And so the Jewish Agency developed this mechanism of overnight going out in the quiet of the night and establishing exactly that, a tower, a roof on it, and a fence. And that basically meant that they could not be torn down. And as it was anticipated that the United Nations was going towards examining what would be the future of this land and can it be divided? How will it be divided? The Jewish Agency, the director of community establishment at the time, Levi Eshkol, who later became a prime minister of the state of Israel, he decided that the Western Negev has to be a part of the new state to be. And so he organized for this effort to overnight establish 11 new communities. Be'eri, Nirim, Sufa, Chatzerim, many others were established overnight at the end of Yom Kippur, 1946, thinking that the British would not be suspicious that Jews are going out to do any business at the end of Motzei Yom Kippur. And they were established, and that is also what made it clear to the United Nations that the Western Negev can be blossomed and can be brought to life through the efforts of these Jewish communities. And so it became a part of the new borders of the state to be.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you. Can I switch gears for a second? One of the roles of the Jewish Agency is also to help facilitate Aliyah to Israel. And I know part of your background was working with the Ethiopian Aliyah and also with the French community. The Aliyah continues. There are still people coming to Israel as we speak. Can you talk about that process, where they're coming from, why they're coming, Okay. Is it anti-Semitism, whatever it may be, and where they're going and how the Jewish Agency helps resettle them?
So it's true, Mark. We've seen the last year of 2022 as one of the highest years of Aliyah in over 20 years. There were over 75,000 Jews that made Aliyah to Israel in that year, the majority of them coming from Russia and Ukraine. These were Jews that felt that life in Russia were simply not something that they could live under anymore. It effectively became a state of terror towards its own citizens, limiting every sense of freedom. Parents would whisper in the kitchen at night because they knew that even if their children would hear them being critical of the government of Russia, and God forbid, repeated at school, they could simply be arrested just for expressing any kind of criticism towards the government of Russia. In Belarus, parents have such a level of fear because they know that if the government accuses them of any kind of treason, they can actually take their children away from them. It's not even a matter of whether the parent would be arrested or not. They can actually take your children away from you in Belarus if you're suspected as being not loyal towards the government. And so these realities and the prospect of a good future in Israel led many of these Belarus, Ukraine, Russian Jews to choose Israel already since the Russian attack on Ukraine began in the earlier part of 2022. And 2022, 2023 were very high years for Aliyah. And here, when we came into October, of course, it had impacted Aliyah, and there were people that were planning their Aliyah for that next week or for the weeks next, and that canceled. But the majority did not. And they did not, even though hardly any foreign airline was flying in and out of Israel. You could only come to Israel on El Al flights and a few airlines that come out of Russia. And despite that, most of those that were planning Aliyah did not cancel. We've had groups coming in from Russia, from France, from Ukraine, from the United States, really from probably about 30 countries around the world. And I can also share with you that at this time, the number of Jews that are opening Aliyah files in France, for example, has quadrupled. It's
Quadrupled.
quadrupled. The number of Aliyah files open in France in this period since October 7th has quadrupled. Thousands of French Jews have opened Aliyah files requesting to make Aliyah at this time. And just a couple of weeks ago, we opened our session of Ulpan Etzion. It's probably our most veteran program for young academic adults that are making Aliyah on their own to start their life in Israel. We've been doing this program since 1947. And we've had now in the program 160 young adults that just made Aliyah. They come from 25 countries around the world, including the United States, and they are starting their life in Israel at this time.
Wow. Speaking of assisting people, you work with lone soldiers. Can you talk a bit about what the Lone Soldier Program is and the work of the Jewish Agency with those soldiers?
Yes, so we support lone Olim soldiers from the very early stages because many come to Israel precisely at the age of 18 or in their early 20s with the goal of making Aliyah, getting their Hebrew at a sufficient level, and joining the army. That's really the goal that they come with. There are others that come first on a longer program, and then they decide that they will go into the army. But for the most part, at any given time, you have approximately 1,500 to 2,000 lone Olim soldiers serving in the IDF. And these are in many ways, the bravest soldiers that you'll meet because, in Israel, being a soldier, you're enveloped by your family. Your parents will drive you to base. Your parents will do your laundry for you. They'll cook your favorite food. They'll call and scream at your officer if they think that you're not being treated properly. They'll shine with pride whenever there's a ceremony in which you get a beret or any kind of pin or any kind of distinction. And whereas as a lone soldier, you have no family that can even understand what you're going through. You come back to an empty apartment. You have to cook your own Shabbat meal. You have to do the grocery shopping, do your own laundry. And you have this feeling of being utterly alone. Now, there are many organizations that will try to support lone soldiers to combat that loneliness. Our focus at the Jewish Agency through the Wings program is to really focus on the one hand on helping them come to the IDF the most prepared as possible through Hebrew acquisition, through many workshops and preparation sessions that we lead. We help them improve their ability to get good placings in the IDF. During their time in the IDF, our focus is really on times when they might need emergency help. If God forbid they are wounded, we will fly their parents to the country. If they are sick and hospitalized, we will be by their side, visiting them and supporting them. We are their 911 when something truly goes wrong for them in the IDF. And as they near their end of service, we are there to support them and to help bridge this transition to civilian life. Because the worst thing is that, you know, when you're in the IDF, you can be a lone soldier. So even if you're alone, you get prestige and support by being a soldier. When you're released, you can just be alone, completely alone. And so we support them in helping them prepare for civilian life, guiding them on academic choices, career choices, economic assistance, and we work with them for years in different social bonding groups. We have sports groups, cooking groups, art groups of these released lone soldiers. And at this very harsh time, there have been already some 14 lone soldiers that were killed fighting in Gaza. And for each one of them, we have been with their families. Many of the families we have flown to Israel to be able to be at the funeral, at the Shiva. We have been supporting them in these weeks and months since they were killed. And also those that were wounded. And we see a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear coming from the parents mostly, the soldiers. They are so courageous and so dedicated at this time. And this is another battle, Mark.
Wow. We just have a couple of minutes left, Danielle. So tell us anything you'd like to share that we should take home with us at the end of this call about the Jewish Agency, about what's going on in it, whatever you'd like to express to us.
I'd like to express that this is probably the harshest time that anyone alive today has experienced since Israel was established. And that this is not limited to, you know, a recovery from a terror attack or a recovery from a need to rebuild one's home. This is an entire watershed moment that in many ways will define the future of Israel. And what is so clear is that if we are to be able to emerge from this somehow, we have to be able to stand together. We have to be able to bridge differences, distances, any kind of void that we felt or that many of us still feel over matters that are critical, you know, conversion, the status of Jewish pluralism in Israel, so many matters that are critical and that we have to address, but we have to be able at this time to look at the most basic definition of what does it mean to be Jewish, at Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh, and to live and act on that value, because that is our only chance for any kind of healing.
Beautiful. Danielle, on behalf of the Portland Jewish community, thank you for sharing everything that you shared today. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody in the state of Israel, the IDF, getting the hostages back home, all of those things. I have a quote on my desk over there that says, success is knowing that you helped somebody today. And I hope you know how successful the Jewish Agency has been through all of this, your efforts, the entire Jewish Agency for Israel's efforts, that you are making a difference in people's lives. And we're grateful for that. We're proud to be a supporter of that and to help enable you to do that. And we're really grateful for the work that you're doing. So thank you for taking time with us this evening in Israel, this morning here in Portland. As I said, you're welcome anytime. Love to show you around. But really just thinking of you and only wishing all the best in the days ahead. And everybody who joined
Thank
us
you.
this morning, thank you. And Danielle, if you could send us the PowerPoint, that would be greatly appreciated if we were able to share that with the community. Whatever.
Of course.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. And Danielle, be well. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right.
Mark.
Bye-bye.